Shekia Scott, 30, from Boston, Mass., currently residing in Philly, is the former Director of Community Outreach and Equity Programming at the state's Cannabis Control Commission. Within this position, she focused on promoting the inclusion of communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, marijuana prohibition, arrest, and incarceration in the adult use marijuana industry. Shekia developed and introduced Mass's first in the nation statewide social equity program. It provided technical assistance, training, and opportunity for entry into the industry across 4 areas with additional program benefits. Additionally, she co-founded the Boston Police Camera Action Team, which successfully introduced community influence policy and outfitted BPD with body cameras. The BPD project led her service as Policy Director and Neighborhood Liaison for Boston City Councilor and the first African American woman president of the City Council, Andrea Campbell.
We have with us Shekia Scott. I was basically telling her how she is the perfect person to join this course for 2 particular reasons. One, her work with the Boston Police Department and some policy change there, very relevant in these times, and then also being a program director for the CCC. The CCC is an agency that basically was one of the first in the United States or the nation to have an equity program, and Shekia was a director of that program. So welcome, Shekia. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. As you said, my name's Shekia. My last name's Scott. My title at the commission was actually Director of Community Outreach, which confuses a lot of people. Programming built into that title and led me to create and develop from just the idea, which we usually refer to as Commissioner Title's baby, that I raised, but into the social equity program. Prior to that, I was the policy director in the first African American City Council President's office, Andrea Campbell. She's also the District 4 City Councilor. I was in her office at that time as well, and she's currently still the District 4 City Councilor, but prior to that, I co-founded BPCAT, which is the Boston Police Camera Action Team, with a high school friend of mine, Shekia Scott, who is like the man of Boston right now. And we successfully wrote community developed policy that now has turned into full citywide program in which all of our officers wear body cameras. And so, yeah, I am 31. I lived in Boston my entire life, and now venturing out. And so I'm now currently located in Philly.
Very nice. And you no longer work for the CCC, correct?
I no longer work for the CCC. So I left my position on June 26th of 2020. So just fresh, and didn't move directly into something else, as I wanted to take time to actually just live, especially as we worked, the commissions more specifically, we worked straight through the pandemic. We didn't have a break. We didn't, we acknowledged it, and we worked remotely, but we didn't take a break or have any days off. So
Right.
Now I'm taking that time.
Oh, absolutely. Well-deserved. We know that. Well-deserved. So, yeah, you mentioned that you're in Philly right now, and currently there's 33 states that have legal cannabis, whether it's medical market or adult use market. So how does it feel to pioneer, be one of the first in the nation to really, pioneer the program, an equity program?
It feels amazing, right? It feels good to set the tone, because I know that it's only going to get better. Other states are going to look at it as an example, just like I did for Oakland's citywide equity programs, and then say, where can we be better? So that's, that feels awesome to know that Massachusetts can be that example. And then also my vision and my brain power, kick that off. And it feels good, but it also shines a light on how much more we have to do, and how much people outside of those who are impacted think that, just these programs or these one-off programs are the solution to this major, deeply entrenched issue of like the war on drugs, mass incarceration, just the criminalization of Black people, and then, you know, other people of color in general. So, you know, I think it comes with its pros and its cons, but it feels amazing to have been in that space and to see how far we can go and what we could do to actually provide some type of reparative justice to the injustice that we've seen even continue as states legalized.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the cool things about you joining this class, and then also working for the CCC, is that your relevant experience, you know, working with Boston Police Department and instituting change there. So what can you tell us a little bit about, like, you know, that work you did and how it helped you prepare to work, you know, in the social equity space for cannabis?
Well, I think that it helps you prepare because just outside of my own personal experience, it helps you understand the parallels, right? Sometimes people think of weed, they don't understand how much is connected to criminal justice and policing and what that looks like. And more than half of all drug arrests were for cannabis. And if we had seen some of those on camera, we would have seen a lot of those being planted or unjust arrests, right? Or just like, why is this happening? But we don't really see those parallels, and so until we start getting into those different realms of work. So I think that it was key there, but also just navigating the system, right? When we co-founded this organization, I did not work in government. I had no desire to. I'm a bio major.
Wow.
I was not going down that path, but I felt like I needed to do something. And I was tired of being in this cycle, right? You see it in Injustice on TV just recently, George Floyd. And then you're like, and then you're like, but wait, what do I do? And that around this time, it was Trayvon Martin, and then Mike Brown. And after Mike Brown, I couldn't just be mad anymore. I couldn't go through that cycle. And it just helped me understand how many barriers there actually are when you're trying to get people to do the right thing, no matter how simple they may seem. And then how to navigate the system, you know, from the outside, and then how much power we actually have. And I think that's really kind of what helped transition me into cannabis, is because I know that we can enact these things and we have a lot more power than we think we do in terms of what these programs look like or what these laws look like or our regulations. And it's just a matter of us stepping up and getting it done. So there's a lot of parallels between the work because they intersect.
Right.
And I think that was the key to know, like, okay, this is the criminal justice aspect of it, the policing aspect of it, and then to tie it actually to the plant and work within the commission.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's something interesting that you said I didn't know about you, that you didn't have a goal to work in policy or politics. You're a biomajor. That I did. So what? And you kind of talked to it a little bit when you brought up Trayvon and Mike Brown. Was that like the turning point that kind of made you want to shift into this, you know, political realm to make change that way?
Yes, I actually never, even when I co-founded BP Cat, I never thought that I would then work in government. But through that work, you know, people are watching what you do, and you make a lot of collaborations within your local and state stakeholders and lawmakers, because you have to. So you have to, like I've had meetings with the mayor, meetings with the past BPD commissioner and the current one, of course, but at the time he was not the commissioner. But our city councilors, our district attorneys, and things of that nature. And then once you see who is all involved, it naturally leads you down that path. But I was thankfully sought out by the counselor's office at that time, which showed me a different side of myself, like, oh wow, I can be a part of government. I can do this. I can write policy from within an office. But I didn't have my goals set on that. And I think if we go back to 2012, I think that was a turning point. One of my closest friends, as I said, and my co-founder, Shagun, was leading a protest and things for Troy Davis, who was wrongfully executed, or was going to be executed at that time, and he ended up being executed. But when I saw that, I was like, wait a minute, we can just do this? Like, this just happens. And I was inspired by that. So then when, Trayvon Martin happened, I went to a bunch of protests, but that was like the end of the road. And then when Mike Brown happened, that was like the end of the rope for me. I text Shagun immediately, and I was like, we need to go to Ferguson. Like, something has to happen. And he was like, no, like, we need to do something here. And so a few days after, we were like, okay, what's a tangible, not solution, because you cannot solve years and years and years and years of racism and bias and discrimination with any program. You just can't do it. And there's not any one thing that's a solution, but what is something that we can contribute? And I think avoiding Boston becoming Ferguson in the way that it was publicly displayed, as the police came in and tear gassed and beat protesters and things of that nature. We said, what could prevent Boston from becoming that? And one of those first steps was body cameras. It's like, put cameras on the offices and let's see what's actually happening.
Right. No, absolutely. So you had talked a little bit about kind of growing your network. You didn't really think that you would get into politics, and you got into politics and you start to grow your network. And I would say it's probably the same with cannabis. You have probably a large network of having worked for the state and some pretty influential people. But there's still states that don't have cannabis. There's still even cities in Massachusetts that don't have cannabis with moratoriums. What message would you have for those municipal leaders, for maybe those state leaders, and maybe that are against cannabis but are forced to kind of work within it because it's legalized? And then just a generic message you would have for folks that are in those influential leadership positions.
I think the most important message is to think of equity as more than programming. Equity is every part of, or should be every part of, any agency that you put together. And it should be a part of every department within that agency. And it shouldn't be siloed or pigeonholed into this one thing, or this one idea, like, oh, well, if we have this, like equity department, they can do these things. No, it has to be agency-wide or municipal level wide. And you have to make sure that you're thinking about, who do these things leave out? And then how do we include those people as well? Just make it an umbrella. Equity isn't, okay, well, let's just give them this discount, or let's pair them with businesses that are, big capitalist businesses that could just, take them under their wing, or let's give them technical assistance and training. It's all of those things. It's all of them. It's not just, okay, well, Massachusetts, we're going to have this one program. And not that Massachusetts is, and I hope that, throughout the years, we see more programming coming out. Right now, we're at two equity programs, but thinking about it as more than that. And then I would say, for those, especially in the municipalities that do not have legal cannabis or condone it in that way, it's still legal in your state. So just making sure that even if you're not, or your constituents are not for it there, that they know the opportunities to go outside of your municipality and still run and own a business and be successful in this space without thinking, oh, well, my city banned it, so I can't do anything. No, that's not how that works. So, just thinking about equity as more than just programming, living it, and then thinking about where you're leaving people out, especially those that have been disproportionately impacted.
Absolutely. And that brings up a great point, the question about medical market, right? Because the medical market, here we are talking about the equity program, and people say cannabis is legal and think about adult use. But the fact is that marijuana was first decriminalized here in Massachusetts, same in PA and New York and New Jersey. Then it goes to a medical market. Those medical markets do not come with social equity provisions. It usually takes adult use to trigger that. So what's the perspective on making a medical market more equitable? And then in addition, like, why is it siloed? Why do we have to go to the adult use to get social equity? Why can't we get equity when it's medical?
And you know what? I think that that's a great question. And it comes down to two things: rushing, right? When we put out our ballot and people said yes, weed should be legal or decriminalized first, right? Then you think, oh my gosh, we got to get this thing up and running. You don't normally connect that to the criminal justice system or policing. You're just thinking, oh, this is medicine. There's no equity that needs to be there or to be thought about there, when that's completely wrong. And we've seen systematically how just even in our healthcare system, I believe Black women are 237% more likely to die, in childbirth or just things like that. So I just think that there's a separation of understanding what equity is, rushing to get the industry up and running, and not tying medical marijuana to the criminalization of marijuana in general. Because when you think medicine, you're like, oh, it's medicine. Like, you're not thinking back in, and I shouldn't even say back in the day, but when the war on drugs began, people who were using marijuana for medical reasons, they were criminalized too. Right. And you're not thinking about that. You're thinking, people's minds automatically think, no, they were doing something against the law and it wasn't legal. And so they went to jail. And it's like, no, like I was doing this because, I had this issue or etc. But that didn't matter. And so, yeah, I think it's just making sure that when we're thinking of the medical industry, we're tying in the history of this plant in general and looking at the criminalization of it, which did include medical criminalization of it, regardless if it was jotted down like that as your offense or not. That doesn't take away from the fact that you may have been using marijuana for medical reasons.
Right. No, that makes sense. I think, one of the things that comes into mind is like, why do we even have to go through this medical thing? Why can't we just jump to an adult use market? Maybe that would be the perspective of when we're thinking equity first, Yeah. But I agree with you 100%. I mean, when it comes down to medical or adult use, you kind of have to be in that position to say we have to have our equity lens on. And I think aligned with that, you talked about Oakland a little bit. I know in Illinois, they have a program where there's financial assistance in addition to some training. I'm not sure if that's the case in Oakland as well. But when it comes to rolling out a program like this, why Massachusetts doesn't have financial assistance yet? Kind of why is that? And is it beneficial to think about that? And what does it take to institute that? And I know you kind of work within a small budget, as we talked about a bit. So just hoping you can shed some light on the financial side of things.
So I think there's a lot that goes into that. But I want to clarify that in a way, through the program's benefits, there is financial assistance, right? We provide licensing application fee waivers. Right. We provide annual renewal fee waivers for 50%. We provide seed to sale tracking waivers. And these are not waivers that you have to fill out and waive. Once you're accepted into this program, you no longer have to pay for that application fee. You no longer have to pay, because we know that the financial hardships go hand in hand with that. Right. But we don't have like a fund or a grant. Right. And in Massachusetts right now, I believe it's 260A that they're trying to pass, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a low interest loan fund that they're trying to put together specifically for equity designees, right? To provide them the capital and the funding that they need, because this is a huge barrier for people who have been disproportionately locked out of opportunities, whether that be housing, employment opportunities, because of convictions for maybe like a dime or a dub or, you know, of weed. And I hope you guys know what I'm saying. But what goes into that is that the commission itself, and when I was there, I did have some ideas to, maybe I can use some of my budget to put a little bit of it aside for a grant, but that would still only fund maybe 1 or 2 participants, right? Or disproportionately impacted persons. And when I say we have to start thinking about things as more than the program, right? I keep saying participants. The participants of the program are not the only people who have been disproportionately impacted. They're not the only people who deserve equity. And when we start thinking about it like this, we start limiting everything, to the participants. And even I'm doing it, right? So that's what I mean. But what goes into that is that right now we just did a major rally. Chanel, she is the founder of Ardent. It's like a ancillary cannabis business. She held a public rally, and making sure that we remind them, and this is something Commissioner Title as well as Chairman Hoffman said on the rally, is that we're not reaching out to them to let them know that this is an issue. They know that it's an issue. They know it's something that they need to work on. We're reaching out to them to remind them that it's a priority, because, you know, there's a lot of things that need to get legislated, and there's a lot of things that take more priority to some of the legislators, because that's what their constituents are raising. And if we're just silent, but we're like, we need this,
right,
they're never going to enact those things. So shout out to Illinois for baking that in at the very beginning. They probably looked at Massachusetts and was like, that's where they went wrong.
Yeah.
But I do think that we're on our way there. But yeah, I also think thinking about money, in this way, making it intentional. I don't agree with Massachusetts doing a loan program. Why would you give loans to people who have been disproportionately impacted? Then you're sending them perpetually, in a sense, into debt that they then have to recover from, regardless if it's low interest or not. These groups are coming from places where they've gone to prison in most cases, and it's impacted their kids and their family. They can't get the best employment that they're looking for. They can't make the salaries that they should be making because people discriminate against their past. And especially for something as small as this plant, and all of that ties into their finances. So I don't like the idea of giving loans to people who have consequentially lost a lot of their financial stability,
right.
due to the criminalization of this plant. So it's just really being intentional. But also, again, like I said, rallying your legislatures or your municipal stakeholders, which are like your city councilmen or your aldermen. I know people call them different things in different places, but they all serve the same purpose. And making sure that you are aware of where these things are in this process, and then how to make your voice heard, and showing up. And if you can't, let your friend know, and let their friend know, so that we can have an ongoing community that keeps saying, wait a minute, what about this? And holding people accountable.
Right. So just going back to the loan segment that you touched on a little bit, how you don't agree with the loan. Another avenue or a way to get financial assistance to people in a way where it's, I guess, it would be more like a grant, is what you're saying, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I know that there is a group in Massachusetts. They're called the Mass Recreational Consumer Council, MRCC. And one of they are right now, and Saskia is her name that I see her championing it, is that, okay, fine, if you're going to do a loan program, then do a loan forgiveness program in tangent with this. But I would say, yes, give them grants, give them scholarships in a sense. Hey,
Right.
what is your, experience? And then being able to like pick people, develop creative ideas of how we give this money back. And the only reason why we can't just do a free for all, right, is because it's government. The money needs to be tracked, etc. So when people hear, well, why do we need to do grants? Just again, a fund, a trust, but it has to be in some formal way so that the government can track the money. But yeah, like, just think creatively as opposed to alone, right? If I personally was like, okay, well, how can I get funding? And they were like, oh, you take out this loan. I'd be like, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
I've never had a loan before in my entire life because I'm so afraid
Right.
of going into debt, right? Because I've seen a long lineage of going into debt just because of the circumstances of America and how they, how it keeps people back from being able to generate generational wealth or financial stability, especially if you are from certain demographics.
Right. No, that's a great point. And it's interesting that it's ongoing right now, Like,
Yes.
that's probably the most interesting. I kind of kicked it off with saying how your experience is relevant. So it's just a lot to think about. So which state is winning right now? Who when it comes to equity, who's doing it right, if any?
So no one is doing it right? No one's doing it right because like I said at the beginning of this, I feel like the first instinct is like, okay, well, what's our program going to be?
Right.
And that's not what equity is. Equity is being intentional about not just saying, okay, we're going to do this program, but we're going to we are going to have a 2-to-1 ratio or a 1-to-1 ratio of licensing so that we can ensure that when we look back at this industry, it's not going to be like Massachusetts is right now, a 75% white male dominated industry. And that's on the ownership and the workforce development levels. Wow. And that's one because there's no ratio that we're enacting because we thought, and even though we've written it into our legal, our laws and our regulations, we still thought, okay, let's do programming, as opposed to, okay, well, in licensing, we're going to do this. Now, right. We gave priority review, which was awesome. So let me back up a little bit. No one's doing it correctly because they're not being intentional, but I will say that I think Massachusetts is doing the best. Right. And not just because I'm there, or I was there, but because we put a lot of thought into everything that we've been doing, and we're not afraid to go back and say, okay, we're failing this, and being transparent about that, what that looks like, right? No one would know, well, you would be able to see it with your bare eyes, but no one would really know that the agent registration process is made up of 75% white males if the commission itself didn't say, hey guys, look at this, right? So, while we weren't intentional, because even though we were intentional about programming, right, we weren't intentional about equity overall. And I think every state is doing that. Illinois, I think, Illinois has a lot of measures that they did look at Massachusetts and say, okay, we're going to do this better, but they still honed it into like programming. Right. And you don't see, or you're not going to see the license numbers come out of that because there's still so many other barriers that these demographics or these communities are going to face, like funding and capital. So there's no way to actually enact equity unless you do a 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 ratio, because all the big players are going to just have teams of lawyers and big teams that they can just get their applications written very quickly, get all the paperwork assembled for them, pay out everything they need to do, hundreds of millions of dollars for security systems. And the smaller player is going to be sitting there chugging along, going into these programs, right?
Right.
Trying to find funding, and there's going to be 75 licenses issued in that time, right? And it's like, okay, so you don't want an equitable industry because you know the barriers that that these people face, and you're still just letting, businesses, open and apply for licenses without waiting for these businesses to be able to catch up.
Right. And I think you touched on it a little bit before, is that like it takes a team, a really strong effort across the board. It can't just be a program where it's siloed. You need to look at licensing and law enforcement and all these different within your agency, right?
Agency, yes.
And social equity is there for each of those departments, if you will.
Absolutely. And so even in Massachusetts, our industry, in our agency, the CCC, right, we have a licensing department, we have a communications department, we have a legal department, we have a research department, we have, and this sounds like a lot of people, but it's not a lot of people in each of those departments. But we have an enforcement, a department, we have an inspections department, and each of those departments also need to focus on equity, right? Because when you go out to do an inspection, the bigger player, the more prepared, is going to pass their inspection with flying colors. But you're going to have these equity businesses that are opening, and they're not going to know how to prepare for that investigation, or when they get cited on something that they need to fix, they're not going to immediately have the access to the capital or the funding to fix that, which is going to delay the opening of their business. And you need to have people in that department that know that and that are able to focus on saying, hey, when we go out to these businesses, this is what we have to do. This is who we have to connect those businesses with so that they can be prepared to open. If not, you're just going to have this program, and they're going to go through the program, get out of the program, and then go through licensing and still not be successful. So you have to tie it all together, or you're just leaving strings loose.
Right. So you, I know this just for the folks in the audience here. You were an early CCC. You basically started working for them early on. Like what number employee, if you remember?
Oh, yes. So the CCC was established in 2017, late like November.
Right.
And I came on in May of 2018. And by that time, between November and like March, only the commissioners and a few other people worked at the commission, maybe about 6 to 8 when I came on. And so it was very small. It was a very small commission. And I know when people heard the word commission, they think all of these people doing this, doing these very, big jobs. And it's like, nah, it's like 6 of us, and we're all doing everything that we possibly can to get this up and get all of these things running. And then you have the public like, where are the licenses? And where's the equity program? And it's like, oh my God.
How many
but
now when you left?
Oh, wow. So by the time I left, there's about 70 of us.
Wow.
But that's over 2 years.
Right.
So you have to even think that, even though that's fast growth for me, like one day I just blinked and I'm like, oh my God, so many people work here.
Right.
That's not really fast growth when you know that the public, and even people that are not just the public, are thinking of like this big commission that's doing so much work. But yeah, so I started around, there was about 6 to 8 of us, and I left and there was about 70 of us.
Wow. And you were we've said this before, that like people think of the commission, this whole big conglomerate of folks. Same thing for the equity program, right? It's really just you and another help and Shalene that really took a strong hold on the program. So, and
Absolutely.
I got, of course, thank you, because I'm part of that program.
Yes. Well, one of them, economic empowerment.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. It's been a lot. It's been a lot. So I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, George Floyd, the pandemic that's going on right now. How do you think these two events, these two major events, have impacted the cannabis industry from an equity standpoint?
Majorly. And with George Floyd, you know, like I was saying, making those connections, like cannabis, again, was half of all drug arrests. Think about that. Anytime someone was arrested for drugs, 50% chance that it was because of cannabis. And then 88% of all of those arrests for cannabis were because of possession. And George Floyd being murdered by the police, people are like, what does that have to do with cannabis? And it's because the criminalization of just being a Black person in general, that's one thing, right? Cannabis searches and arrests were disproportionately Black males. And that's an agenda. And that is a part of George Floyd's story. He's a Black male in this society, inherently criminalized. And just drawing the connection that, one, the war on drugs is not possible without the criminalization of the police, right? The police criminalizing certain communities and enacting their positions or their power in certain communities in certain ways. And that just draws to the parallels of one, the war on drugs, high arrest rates, mass incarceration, and it shows that these things never went away. Regardless of if George Floyd was getting arrested for cannabis that day, he would have still been murdered. And we can't leave out all that has been done because of policing in the cannabis space and not tie that to the events happening at this time, because they're directly related. And you can't say that you are going to enact equity or have an equity mission if you don't know that and if you don't understand that, because you're not even looking at the problem correctly. If you think that you can provide equity to an issue where people were heavily incarcerated, some of them probably murdered that we didn't see on camera, right? And targeted without acknowledging that has to do with policing. I think COVID in its own way, it froze a lot of the businesses that are disproportionately impacted, right? Because again, here's where you don't have the resources to either quit your job or not work during this, right? A lot of us have essential jobs and that most people have, so that they can now use that money to cross over into the cannabis industry or fund their business in the cannabis industry. And COVID put a pause on everything, right? And if it didn't, you're putting yourself, or you have to put yourself at a significant risk, right? You're risking your life to make sure that you can have your business be sustainable, or you can still do your community outreach meeting, or fulfill all the parts of the process that you were in before this just popped up. And we know again that people that are making a lot of money or have capitalized off of the incarceration and the criminalization of marijuana now are able to just sit at home and relax while everybody else is struggling. So, and they both go hand in hand, because we also see from data from COVID that Black and African American, Latino, Latinx, and other people of color are the most disproportionately impacted by COVID, as well as they are the most disproportionately impacted by the over-policing of us as Black people, of our bodies, of our neighborhoods, of our lives, right? Just like we saw with George Floyd.
Right. No, it's a great point. I mean, healthcare, there are disparities there too, just as we talk about the medical market as well. But one of the prevalent things with the George Floyd is the defunding of the police. That conversation is like huge in many, many cities. And then we
Yes.
talk about funding for cannabis and how not many states have those provisions to kind of help with grants or things of that nature. But do you think that tax from cannabis entities, whether it's medical or recreational, should help fund the police? Seems like a silly question, but I just want to get your perspective on why or why not.
Hell no. Hell no. And I think it just goes to everything that I just said. Policing is the main tool that is used or was used, continue to be used in the criminalization of marijuana, weed, cannabis, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It's the main tool used to create mass incarceration, to create the war on drugs. And so to continue to fund that, continues that cycle of racism and the disparities that we're going to see, regardless if we say, oh, well, we're going to give it to train them. You can't train racism away.
Right.
You cannot do it. We tried. Every single time something happens like this, another training pops up. Oh, let's do anti-racism training now. Oh, let's do what's the next one? If that doesn't change anything. So give your money to those communities. Give your money to other agencies, and not to say that racism and bigotry and discrimination don't live in those agencies as well.
Yeah.
As we talked about healthcare, right? But those agents don't walk around with guns and force and are able to enact forces on you in
Right.
which you will die. I mean, healthcare, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. They can kill you, right? But I mean in the sense that, you know, the police sometimes and a lot of times show up to help people and end up killing those people.
Absolutely.
And so you take out that risk factor, in a sense. But no, please don't
Right.
give more. I agree with defunding the police, absolutely. Reallocating those funds to other agencies, and just as we talked about, even reallocating those funds directly to the cannabis industry.
Absolutely.
Hey, we're going to reallocate our funds for the Boston Police, you know, to the cannabis board, and they can decide, you know, where they want to give that money out. Why not, right? Or we're going to defund the state police, and now from that state police budget, which we should
Right.
defund them, give that money to the CCC and see what they, you know, and let them enact a fund or a grant. But I hope we actually abolish the police. I'm with my abolitionist here. But I definitely, you know, agree with us defunding the police, because we've seen that they have been used as an agent of the state to enact crime,
Right.
right? And we don't necessarily look at it as crime, because we've been taught a certain idea of what the police are and what they do, even when we have not seen that in practice.
Right. No, I love that point. Maybe we should, if it's defunding, then that route should go to, right? You would enjoy getting money from the police for your program.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
I love that. All right, cool. So we're gonna move to some speed questions here. Okay. This is a good part because I know you're for the culture. You smoke weed, so
yes, sir.
these won't get too weird. Some of the people I do interview, like I interviewed a DEA agent the other day, and he tried to tell me he never smoked weed before.
But you see, that's key though. That's key because we have a lot of people, again, like I said, capitalizing off of the industry and criminalizing the industry, right? A DEA, right? But they don't even understand the industry. They don't even understand the plant. They know nothing about it, but they're in these positions to criminalize you for it or to gain money off of your investment of your life, after it was criminalized.
And that's why I think it's special for you too, just being in the social equity program, because if we whittle it down a little further, it makes sense. I mean, you're, of African descent, you come from a community that's been harmed. I'm sure you know family and friends. So I think it's even more minute to be intentional in that fashion as well, to be with it. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I completely agree. And you're going to always meet a lot of resistance when you're working with people, or like you said, you're interviewing people who have not had that interaction or
Right.
that experience with the plant itself,
Right.
or the I keep saying it, but the criminalization of the plant itself.
Yeah, no, makes sense. All right, cool. So your favorite marijuana or drug movie or documentary?
How High.
Okay.
I actually liked How High too, which a lot of people were like, why did they do this over? But I thought it was funny.
I never. Is that what the dude from Wild Night out?
No, it's with yes, DC Young Fly
Yeah.
and Little Yachty.
I gotta see that.
I'm old, but I'm also really young and hip.
What's your favorite musician or music genre?
Again, like you said, I'm Black. I like hip hop, R&B, rap.
Okay.
I like a lot of music. I like a span of music, but my favorite, again, hip hop, R&B, rap. And my favorite artist, and I mean artist, writer, producer,
Right.
performer, is The Dream. And most people are like, what? But yeah, he's my
Okay.
favorite.
Okay. You got any
He's written for your favorites: Beyonce, Rihanna,
Really?
everybody.
I used to think The Dream was a group. It's just one person, right?
No, listen. So long ago in the 90s, there was a group called Dream, and it was like 4 white women,
Oh.
I believe. Yeah. But no, he is The Dream.
Yeah.
And he's amazing.
Word. Absolutely. Okay, so one book that has helped you navigate your career.
Ooh, I don't know about one book. Oh, navigate my career though. Wow. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. But I think any book I read helps me navigate my career because it helps me with my life. And I want to give you 3 because
Okay.
I can't stick to one. But my ultimate is Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Oh yes.
Just amazing. Amazing.
That guy's over my head.
It is just woo. Like I just like
He's so smart.
it's just he's such an amazing writer, and he conveys things in a way that I feel like, one, resonate with my soul, but
Right.
also our communities and understanding what we're saying when we're saying certain things. So Between the World and Me, that is a life-changing book. There's so many life-changing books, but I say that. I also say Zora Neale Hurston's Barracoon. It is the interview with the last transported slave from Nigeria, and it just changed. I read a lot, and that book changed a lot of what I even thought about slavery, right? And it's like, I know a lot about slavery and enslaved persons, because we keep lumping them into this identity of slaves, but they have real identities, and this gives you one. And the last one I will say, and that I think really, really, really changed my outlook on a lot of things, is called Technopoly. I don't know why, but the author's name is escaping me right now, but it's a male, and that book is just amazing. Like it helps me think. Actually, I think this one might be one that helped me rethink or think about my career, because it helped me think about technology in a way that I never thought about it before, but in context of like, who's being left out of technology? Who does technology serve, right? And when I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, like I never thought about this like that. And that draws me to think, when I'm thinking about programming and stuff, who does this leave out? Who does this data leave out? Who does this eligibility criteria leave out? And then how do we then go get those people? So there you go.
Wow, that tech sounds pretty interesting. I'm probably going to read that after I finish. Actually, I just finished a book today, so that's going to be my next one.
Oh, what are you reading?
What did I finish? It's called The Fourth Turning.
Okay.
It was written in the 90s, and it basically talks about how generations is cyclical. Like things happen in four, like the seasons. So if you think about how things move in the seasons, the same way of life, then like reoccurring crises and economic
Yes.
downturns, they just happen, over and over again.
Oh yeah, I want that.
A little over my head too. I probably got to read it to understand it.
I don't think anybody ever is finished reading a book, right? You can read it from back to front and you think you're finished, but
Right.
I bet you learn something different every time you read it again. It's just like when you watch a movie and you're like, oh wow, I didn't notice that. So you're never finished reading a book.
It's the same with music. You might hear a song so many times and then all of a sudden it hits you differently. You're like, oh.
Exactly. Or you hear that instrument you didn't hear before on the underbeat. You're like, oh, hold on, I didn't hear that little tambourine.
Yeah. Oh, all right, cool. So last couple questions here, and I love this. This is probably my favorite question. It was when you started smoking weed and where?
Okay, so in Boston for me, the first time I like hit a blunt, I was 14. But I think like all kids go through that. I didn't start smoking then. I wasn't interested.
Right.
And not in the way of like, oh, you guys smoke, but I just was like, I was very scholarly. And I didn't think, oh, I can't smoke and go to school. I just wasn't focused on smoking. But then I really started smoking when I was about 17 or 18, but I didn't learn to roll up until what was that? Like 2016.
Wow, yeah.
Just recently.
The commission then.
No, I wasn't. I started working the commission in 2018, but I didn't start rolling up until about 2016, 2017, because I actually have a video of the first time I rolled a blunt because I didn't want to smoke more.
Right.
So that was my thing. So it was kind of three-part for me. I hit a blunt for the first time when I was 14. Right. I started to actually start smoking socially because I didn't roll up myself. Right. Around 17, 18, and I always smoked. I didn't like stop and was like, I don't smoke anymore. Right. But I didn't start really smoking, I'd say, by myself and rolling up until like 4 or 5 years ago.
That's great. Well, you're going to make me expand on this question onto do you know how to roll? I'm gonna start asking.
Yes. Do you know how to roll is a good question.
That's great. What do you? I know the answer to this because we smoked before. But what do you prefer to roll up in? And has that changed? Maybe it has changed. It's been a while since we.
That has not changed. Philly doesn't have them, but they have.
They got Phillies. They have
their own replicas of it. But I like to roll with Fonto. It's a tobacco leaf. I really got into Fonto because other people used to buy it. It used to be like under the market, like under the counter in Boston, and then it became legal. But it's like this big leaf that lasts you for days and days and days. So that's really what I like.
So your parents, your family, how do they perceive marijuana?
Well, my mom is she still calls everything reefer, and
does it really?
She still calls it reefer, and she's not against it though. I definitely smoked with my mom before, so she's not like what are you doing with your life? You smoke weed. She's like this. I do this as a personality trait. It's like, ooh, let me just hit it once. Let me just hit it one time. And then she's like, my dad, he doesn't smoke at all. He smokes cigarettes, but he doesn't smoke weed at all. Not that I know of, unless he's hiding it from me too, because I don't smoke around him. I feel like I smoked around him maybe one time and I felt mad weird about it. I don't know why. He's not like he's not going to look down on me or anything, but it's just like, I'm his little princess. So I just, and then I just don't really be in situations to smoke around him. Like, I'm not a kind of person that also has to smoke. So I don't always have weed with me everywhere I go. And I'm like, oh, I'm about to roll up. Like, I will, but, I'm never in any situations with my dad where I'm like, oh, let me roll up and just smoke real quick. So I don't know I don't think he feels any way about it. He's never told me he does. So I mean, I'm grown, but and then my family, like I smoke with my aunt, so definitely cool about it, accepting, and don't look down on it. But some of them don't smoke, and they're just like, "Ooh, that it stinks," but that's as far as it goes.
Smells like skunk. That's what my mom said this weekend.
Yes. Yes, my mom used to always say that too. Like, is there a skunk? Like, girl, you know what that is.
Yeah, Mom, there's a skunk in the house.
Right. Like, I bought it with me.
Oh, so then your strain. If you were a strain of weed, what strain would it be?
So this may come as a surprise because I smoke, but I'm not much like into all the strands and their names and stuff, because people just name stuff everything now. Now it's like, oh, this is Fruity Pebbles and this is this and this. So I would say that the kind of person I am, I'm like an OG. I'm like an OG Kush. I would be that, just because it has a name for itself, or like a granddaddy perp. Just one of the old school known favorites, because they're like household names, and they're like that's just how my personality is. It's like, okay, somebody wants me around somewhere.
No, I feel you. I think we need more of that in the industry too, to be honest with you, especially from a regulatory perspective. We need people who've been in the culture. They know what they're doing. They're not there for, as you said before, capitalistic reasons. So
right.
Like I said before, I'm in the state social program, so definitely appreciate our friendship and you being here today. So any last words for the group here?
Yes. Last words are: one, think about, again, equity as more than just programming. And when you are looking at programming, make sure you know what the programs are and what they do and what their outcomes are supposed to be. And make sure that you tie those things to licensing, because if you don't, you're going to have successful programs and unsuccessful licensing. And I think that's what we're also seeing in mass, right? And a lot of people conflate the two, and they say, why is the social equity program a failure? And I'm like, oh, excuse me? No, it's not. What are you talking about? Right. But that's because we're tying the success of this to licensing, right? In businesses, and seeing actual numbers of the industry, and not the numbers of the program and the outcomes of the program. So, but also any questions that you may have about the programming that Massachusetts has, or what that looks like, or what was involved in that, please feel free to ask me. I know we didn't get into a lot of details about the design of that and how that works. So definitely open to talking with people and sharing as much knowledge as I can.
I appreciate that. There might be an invite for an in-person class, because we have hybrid with COVID going on. We'll probably have like 7 in-person classes. So if you come home to Boston, you're right down the road in Worcester, we might get you in a classroom if you're open to that.
Let me know and I can be there, but definitely reach out if you have questions, or if you want to know more about programming, or what Massachusetts can or can't do to actualize our equity mission.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Shekia. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Right.
Equity in cannabis is a team effort. It's a community effort. I think the biggest takeaway from Shekia is the fact that there were limited resources, and she did a really good job with those limited resources. But I will say that with every department that the state agency has, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's legal, whether it's communications, whether it's inspection services, all these different departments really need to have social equity at front of mind in order for success to happen. And it's not that the program or Shekia herself is a failure. It's just the fact that this state of Massachusetts and the industry in a whole is just not very equitable, not very diverse. And I think, Shekia did a really good job of, bringing her insight and her experience into this interview. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.